I'm going to be able to balance the budget. Let's talk about military. We did 313 ships. We're headed down to sequestration. I want to make sure we are. Since FDR, we've always had the strategy once. Look, this, in my view, is the highest responsibility of the President of the United States, which is to maintain the safety of the American people. And I will not cut our nomination of the budget cuts that the President has, as well as the sequestration. It's making our future less certain and less secure.
I propose it's something that Congress has proposed. It will not happen. The budget that we're talking about is not reducing our military spending, it's maintaining it. But I think Governor Romney made how our military works. You mentioned the Navy, and that we have fewer ships than we did in 1916. We also have fewer horses and bayonets because the nature of our military has changed. We have these things called aircraft carriers where planes land on them. We have these ships that go underwater, nuclear submarines. And so the question is not what are our capabilities. And so when I sit down with the Secretary of the Navy and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, we determine this needs in a way that also keeps faith with our troops, that also makes sure that our veterans have the kind of support that they need when they come home. And that is not because it just doesn't work.
All right.
And we visited the website quite a bit, and it still doesn't work.
A lot to cover. I'd like to move to the next segment, red lines, Israel and Iran. Would either of you, and you'll have 2 minutes, and President said we deterred Iran. It's certainly deterred the Soviet Union for a long, long time when we made that promise to our allies. Mr. President.
Well, first of all, Israel is a true friend. It is our greatest ally.
We've already made that declaration.
We'll be carrying out the largest military exercise with Israel in history this very week. But to the issue of Iran, as the strongest coalition and the strongest sanctions against Iran in history, and it is crippling their economy. Their currency has dropped 80%. Their oil production has plunged to the lowest level since they were fighting a war with Iraq 20 years ago. Israel's national security. We cannot afford to have a nuclear-armed terrorism, and for them to be able to provide nuclear technology to non-state actors, that's unacceptable. And they have said they want to see Israel wiped off the map. So the work that we've done with respect to sanctions now offers Iran a choice. And a United States president, me, who said we're not going to take any options off the table. The disagreement I have with Governor Romney is that during the course of this campaign, he's often talked as if we should take premature military action. I think that would be a mistake because
President of the United States, when I'm President of the United States, we will stand with Israel. And if Israel is attacked, we have their back. Not just diplomatically, not just culturally, but militarily. That's number one. Number two, with regards to Iran and the threat of Iran. There's no question but that a nuclear Iran, a nuclear-capable Iran, is unacceptable to America. It presents a threat not only to our friends, but ultimately a threat to us to have Iran have nuclear material, nuclear weapons that can be used against. It's also essential for us to understand what our mission is in Iran, and that is to dissuade Iran from having a nuclear weapon through peaceful and diplomatic means. And crippling sanctions are something I called for 5 years ago when I was in Israel speaking at the Herzliya conference. I laid out 7 steps. Crippling sanctions were number one, and they do work. You're seeing it right now in the economy. It's absolutely the right thing to do to have crippling sanctions. How to put them in place or those sanctions. I would say that ships that carry Iranian oil can't come into our ports. I imagine pressure time and time again on Iran because anything other than a solution to this which stops this nuclear Iran, and that is to dissuade Iran from beginning, to make it very clear what is acceptable capability. And the way to make sure they understand that is by having from the very beginning the tightest sanctions possible. They need to be tightened. Our diplomatic isolation.
Let me just respond. Nothing. Starting with this notion of me apologizing. This has been probably the biggest whopper that's been told during the course of this campaign. And every fact checker and every reporter comes to tightening sanctions. Look, as I said before, we put in. You were still invested in a Chinese state oil company that was doing business with the Iranian oil sector. So I'll let the American people be credible when it comes to imposing crippling sanctions. And with respect to our attitude about the Iranian Revolution, I was very stand for. And so the strength that in fact that we've been able to mobilize. When I came into office, And we are going to continue to keep the pressure on to make sure that they do not get a nuclear weapon. That's in America's national interest, and that will be the case so long as I'm president.
We're 4 years closer to a nuclear Iran. We're to Turkey and Iraq, our closest friend in the region. But you, on Arabic TV, you said that America had been dismissive and America had dictated to other nations.
When I went to Israel as a candidate, I didn't take down to the border towns of Sderot, which had experienced missiles raining. The central question at this point is going to be who's going to be credible, whether it's supporting democracy, whether it's facing the world right now.
What if the way we're going to bomb Iran? What do you
Bob, let's thoroughly evaluate it well before that kind of last minute. That's okay. What's happening around the world, and I see Iran 4 years closer to a bomb. Jihadists continuing to spread, whether they're rising or just about the same, they're very strong. I see Syria with 30,000 civilians dead. Assad still in power. I see our trade deficit with China. I look around the world, and I don't feel that Luger anymore. They're back away from around the world. I see our influence receding, or withdrawal from our commitment to our military in the way I think it ought to be, in part because of the turmoil with Israel. I mean, the president received a letter from 38 Democrat senators saying that tensions with Israel and is all in the party.
Range of issues, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's Afghanistan, Iran. You've been all over the map. I mean, I'm pleased applying diplomatic pressure. Now you're for it, although it doesn't. I would take that shot. You said we shouldn't move heaven and earth to get one man. You said we should ask Pakistan for permission. And if we had asked Pakistan for permission, we would not have gotten it. And it was worth moving heaven and earth together. You know, after we killed bin Laden, because that's the kind of clarity of leadership, and those decisions are not always popular. Those decisions generally are not poll tested. And even some in my own party, including my current vice president, had the same critique as you did. But what the American people understand,
America's longest war, Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Bob,
Governor, you get to go first.
You can't, okay, but you can't have the president.
The turnover responsibility for security in Afghanistan to the Afghan government. At that point, we will withdraw our combat troops, leave a smaller force of Americans, if I understand our policy, in Afghanistan for training purposes. Deadline arrives, and it is obvious the Afghans are unable to handle their security. Do we still leave? And I believe Governor Romney to go first.
Well, we're going to be finished by 2014, and when I'm president, we'll make sure we bring our troops out by the end of 2014. The commanders and the generals there are on track to do so. We've seen progress over the past to provide security, and we're going to be able to make that transition by the end of 2014. So our troops will come home and recognize that what's happening in Pakistan is going to have a major impact on the success in Afghanistan. And I say that because I know a lot of people just feel like we should just brush our hands and walk away. And I don't mean you, Mr. President, but some people in our nation feel that Pakistan is being nice to us and that we should just walk away from them. But Pakistan and the Taliban existent within their country. And so a Pakistan that falls apart, becomes a failed state, would be of extraordinary danger. We're going to have to remain helpful in encouraging Pakistan to move towards a more stable government and rebuild a relationship with us. And that means that our aid that we provide to Pakistan is going to have to be conditioned upon certain move Pakistan in the right direction, and also to get Afghanistan to be ready, and they will be ready by the end of 2014.
Mr. President, when I came into office, we were still bogged down in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we are now in a position where what had happened is we'd forgotten why we'd gone. We went because there were people who were responsible for 3,000 American deaths. So we decimated Al-Qaeda's core leader in their own country. Now that transition has to take place in a responsible fashion. We've been there a long time, and we've got to make sure that we and our coalition responsibly in giving Afghans the capabilities that they need. But what I think the American people recognize is after a decade of war, it's time to do some nation building here at home. And what we can now do is free up some resources to, for example, put Americans back to work, especially our veterans, rebuilding our roads, our bridges, our schools, making sure that our veterans are getting the care that they need when it comes to post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury, making sure that the certifications that they need for good jobs in the future are in place. Yeah, I was having lunch with a veteran in Minnesota who had been a medic, dealing with the most extreme circumstances. When he came home and he wanted to become a nurse, he had to start from scratch. And what we've said is, let's change those certifications. The First Lady has done great work with an organization called Joining Forces, putting our veterans back to work. And as a consequence, veterans unemployment is actually now lower than
because you talked about Pakistan and what needs to be done. Catch Obama's bin Laden. It still provides safe
100 nuclear weapons, and it's on the way to double that at some point. A nation that has serious threats from terrorists. There, you've got the ISI, their intelligence organization is probably the most powerful of the. There are nuclear weapons there, and you've got terrorists there who can grab their hands on those nuclear weapons. This is an important part of the world for us. Pakistan is technically an ally. And they're not acting very much like an ally right now, but we have some work to do. And I don't blame the administration for the fact that the relationship with Pakistan is strained. We had to go into Pakistan. We had to go in there to get Osama bin Laden. That was the right thing to do.
Osama bin Laden.
But there was obviously a great deal of anger even before that.
democracy. One thing I think Americans should be proud of, when Tunisians began to protest, this nation, me, my administration, stood with them earlier than just about any other country. Level playing field when it came to trade. And that's the reason why I set up a trade task force to go after. The reason why we have brought more cases against China for violating trade rules than the previous administration has been decided. In fact, just recently. And throughout the Midwest, Pennsylvania, are in a position now to sell a case in which they were flooding us with cheap domestic tires or cheap Chinese tires. And we put a stop to it. And as a consequence, saved jobs throughout America. I have to say that Governor Romney criticized me for being too tough in that tire case. Said this wouldn't be good for American workers and that it would be protectionist. But I tell you, those workers don't feel that way. They feel as if they had finally an administration who was going to take this issue seriously over the long term in order for us to compete with China. We've also got to make sure, though, that we're taking care of business here at home. If we don't have the best education system in the world, if we don't continue to put money into research and technology that will allow us to create great businesses here in the United States, that's how we lose the competition. And unfortunately, Governor Romney's budget and his proposals would not allow us to make those investments.
All right. Well, first of all, it's not government that makes business successful. It's not government investments that make businesses grow and hire people. Let me also note that the greatest threat that the world faces, the greatest national security threat, is a nuclear Iran. Let's talk about China. China has an interest that's very much like ours, in one respect, and that is they want a stable world. They don't want war. They don't want to see protectionism. They don't want to see the world break out into various forms of chaos. So make sure that we have trade relations with China that work for us. I've watched year in and year out as companies have shut down and people have lost their jobs because China has not played by the same rules. In part by holding down artificially our goods. They need to make more. That's why on day one I will label them for taking jobs. They're stealing our intellectual property, our patents, our designs, our technology, hacking the computers, counterfeiting our goods. They have to understand